Parshat Harav. This is the Devar Torah for Parshat Vayeira, which was to be given in Shul this Friday night, the 6th of November. And for those of you who remember the last lockdown, I was due to give Coffee and Conversation on the Shabbat immediately after that lockdown, which I had to do by video. So I'm now giving this Devar Torah again on the first Shabbat after lockdown by video. And I think the moral of the story is, Rabbi and honorary officers, don't ask me to give talks again on a Shabbos because it clearly seems to presage a lockdown. Anyway, this is all about the Sedra that we would have read in Shul this week, that of Vayeira. Now, as we know, the book of Bereshis has a different style and approach from the other books of the Torah. There are no laws, no statutes, no commandments. It's essentially a series of stories told chronologically, which set up the story of our people's descent to Egypt. And our tradition, as stated by Ramban in his introduction to Bereshis, is that the book was dictated to Moshe on Mount Sinai. Therefore, we take it not as a history book, but as a series of lessons which established Judaism as a monotheistic religion. I find it fascinating to scrutinise the historical and social context in which the stories in Bereshis are set. It helps to locate the lessons that we might take away from the Sedra. Now, our traditions pinpoint the Sedra of Vayeira taking place over a period of 38 years between the years 2047 and 2085. Historians and archaeologists locate this period as being in the Middle Bronze Age. All of the action in the Sedra takes place in Canaan, in the Negev, and in the land of the Philistine, or the Philistines as we now call them. This week's Sedra and that of Lech Lecha last week were all about the discovery by Abraham of monotheism. His identification of the supreme power in the world being of one God and King, and the development of Abraham's relationship with God. Our sages believe that Abraham's journey to monotheism coincided with his physical journey from Ur Kasdim through Haran and down to Canaan and the land of the Philistine. This geographical area equates to what the historians call the Fertile Crescent. This is the boomerang-shaped region of the Middle East that was at that time the home to some of the earliest civilizations, also known as the cradle of civilization. So Abraham, living in that area at that time, was surrounded by people who worshipped many gods or worshipped none, and who stuck to moral codes which are at odds with our concept in the modern world of morality. Given this environment, in my opinion, it makes Abraham's discovery of monotheism all the more remarkable. Now, in this week's Sedra, we encounter 3 such references to the immorality and godlessness of the people around Abraham. And I want to highlight these to illustrate the achievement of Abraham in locating and worshipping God and the Jewish moral code when he was surrounded by such immorality. The first are the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, we learn from the 2 angels who visit Abraham in this week's Sedra that the city is to be destroyed, but we need to look into the Midrash and the writings of the commentators to know exactly how bad they were, such that the city deserved to be destroyed. Even Abraham finds it hard to believe that such a place should exist. His moral code is such that he argues that there must be at least 10 righteous people in the city, but as we learn, there are not. According to our sages, it was the greed and the desire for wealth on behalf of the residents that was insatiable. In fact, as we know, and as James said in his Devar Torah last week, in Pirkei Avos, the ethics of our fathers, the phrase, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, was described as a Sodom-type character. In the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, a collection of rabbinic homilies from the 3rd and 4th centuries in the land of Israel, it was written that any residents of these cities who attempted to give food or aid to a poor person was put to death. Only the wealthy were welcome as guests, The poor were to be expelled or killed. That is why we read that a mob surrounded Lot's house seeking out his guests, as they suspected that they were poor. You can add to this the sexual immorality. The people demanded of Lot that he hand over the angels so that they might know them. Now this clearly means knowing them in the biblical sense. And our sages argue that it was not so much the sexual lust that demanded this, but rather a desire to abuse and humiliate the strangers in their midst. Now the second example of the godlessness around Abraham is from his own nephew Lot. We've already seen earlier in the Sedra that Lot was willing to exchange his daughters to the mob in order that they should leave the strangers alone. So his relationship with his daughters is hardly that of the protective father. And famously, later in the Sedra, the daughters seduce their father in order that they might bear children to be able to continue the human race. This act by the daughters, later expressly forbidden by the Torah, is treated sympathetically by the commentators, at least as far as to not attributing excessive condemnation of the daughters. Instead, it is Lot who is indicted. He is condemned for wanting to be in Sodom in the first place. The Midrash, in Agadas Bereshis, says that Lot went to dwell in Sodom when Abraham offered him the choice of the best land, and the reason he went was so that he could engage in licentious behaviour without anyone's knowledge. Therefore, our sages regard the daughter's act as punishment for Lot's own sexual immorality and promiscuity. Rabbi Nachman adds, "Whoever is driven by his hunger for transgression will eventually be fed from his own flesh." Lot was eager to engage in promiscuity. In the end, it was his own family that enabled him to meet his immoral objective. The third incident that I want to refer to is described very briefly, and that is the abduction of Sarah by Avimelech, the king of Gerar. Now this was in the land of the Philistine. It wasn't in Egypt, and it was Egypt who didn't respect marital relations, but it was the Philistine who were supposedly civilized and who respected the 7 laws of Noah. But still, when Abraham went down, he was suspicious enough, and therefore he told everyone that Sarah was his sister, which led to Sarah being abducted by the king. So, let's summarize this. Abraham was surrounded by kidnapping, sexual licentiousness, greed, and murder. How remarkable is it then that Abraham not only discovered God, but also built an entire faith and led the world into monotheism. Nearly half of the world's population today, whether they are Christian, Muslim or Jewish, follow a monotheistic faith that was established by Abraham. Therefore, bringing that to our world today, I find it strange that we in 2020, surrounded as we are by synagogues, by great teachers and rabbis, by places of learning, by books and websites, and an established monotheistic state religion, that we seem to have such difficulty finding God in our daily lives when there is so much around to signpost him to us. These especially challenging times that we live in do provide an excuse to those who do not wish to get close to God. There are reasons not to come to shul even when it's open, not to resume our learning, not to mingle in a community, not to try and find out something about our heritage, not to follow our culture, not to be proud of our heritage. But we, in the modern world, have all the tools that we need to look for God. And we have our basic morality. We believe in kindness, charity, care for others, support for the needy, and bringing a light to the world around us. If Abraham can build the world's moral code when surrounded by such immorality, surely we can be motivated to acts of godliness, kindness in our daily lives. Whatever you're doing this Shabbos, wherever you are, however you are choosing to experience Shabbos in this lockdown. May we look to find God wherever we can and aim to deepen our knowledge of what God wants us to do and to play our part of bringing God back into our world. Shabbat Shalom.